Hi guys, Steve here with another video from Connected Truths, this time on the topic of the keys to understanding sound relationships. So without further ado, let's just get stuck straight into it. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking that I'm showing you a picture of a polar bear in a snowstorm. Not actually true. I'm actually doing this so that I can give myself pause to explain that I'm going to be breaking all of the rules in this presentation. Main rule being that you don't ever quote yourself and don't include any anecdotal stories from your own life. I'm going to break those rules. It'll become obvious a little bit later on why I'm doing so. So let's get stuck into this first slide. One of my quotable quotes. In general, I think it's safe to say that the general just isn't specific enough. You'll notice that I've underlined the word specific, and I've underlined a word on the next slide also. You're always on trial in the court of human opinion, and the main question is, are you a credible witness? Credibility, of course, going to the truthfulness and trustworthiness of what it is that you're saying. Now, this is on my fridge at home. This is something that I like to look at regularly, which is why it's on the fridge. I'm sure, like most of you, I've made stupid mistakes over time, so I like to be reminded, because the only way to prevent those from happening again is to remember that you made the errors in the first place and that you're likely to make more. And the more you're guarded against making more, the less the likelihood that you're going to make them. One more thing before we start the video, the presentation proper. This one is crucial also, I believe, to the topic at hand. We all have a reality distortion field. It's called a temperament, and not knowing about it can ruin otherwise productive lives and relationships. Most of the time, what you think is happening is not really what is actually happening. It's just what you think is happening purely from your own frame of reference, which in brackets there, I've very aptly put temperament filter. Opinions formed over the years are hard to shift, especially if you are an opinionated person who doesn't appreciate the value of objective personal development and continuous improvement. Old habits are hard to change, but not impossible, once you've learned to question what those habits are there for. Next one, last one, on this slide at least. A change of heart is better than anything else that costs you more than a change of heart. Excuse me. Now, the reason that I have all of those points on this slide is because over the years, 30 odd years of doing this work, been privy to a lot of people explaining their stories to me about their relationships and the problems thereof. Not always, of course. Sometimes I've had people describing great relationships, and over time I've come to see the difference between the two. So I guess what you could say, in addition to having been a human dynamics facilitator for so many decades, what qualifies me to do this kind of work is the fact that I correlated 9 systems of personality type with transmission genetics, neuroscience, and what I now call the maturity continuum. So you get to hear about that work in all of the work that I do, and this is no exception. So moving right along to the next slide, we finally get to start. I've stopped breaking all the rules now, by the way, so you can all relax as I get into it. So, this obviously Knowledge is Power series. Some of you will have seen other sessions, no doubt. You'll see more as I release them. Most significant life issues that I've been privy to over the years in the feedback that I've received tells me that this is the top 3. Number 1, health, sufficient nutrition, hydration, exercise, rest and recreation I've put here. Without this, arguably, none of the rest of it happens terribly well. You need to be well to live up to the challenges of this world. Many would argue you need to be at the top of your game. You won't get there without this health category being looked after as it should. Number 2, finances. Sufficient income to assure one to survive and even thrive. Also highly important. Hard not to want to put all of these at number 1, but I think the order I've got them in is quite apt, and you'll get to see why in the next slide. Number 3, love and relationships. An intimate, mutually beneficial and deeply meaningful relationship with a significant other, plus supportive and enriching relationships with family and friends. Now, those of you who might argue with why I have them in this particular order, I'm not the only one. Those of you who know of Maslow and his hierarchy of needs would understand that this is what it's all about. I won't go into it in terrible detail now. Just a sec to let you know that you can pause this video at any point if you want to have a better look at and a read of it, but as you can see, it pretty much follows the order that I had on the previous slide. So moving along to the next slide, we'll look at the prerequisites to sound relationships. As I said before, all of this information I've garnered over many years of doing this kind of work. Mature, truthful and decent people of good intent are required for a relationship to qualify as a good relationship. Point number 2 here, before trying to save a relationship, first decide if it is a relationship that is worth saving. Many humans love things and use people rather than love people and use things. Toxic people create toxic relationships, so avoid these people at all costs. The problem, of course, is that toxic people are well versed in the art of deception, rendering them difficult to spot up front. This is why long internships, courtships, engagement periods, etc. are so important, as are basic questioning skills. You need to have at least basic questioning skills to start to be able to find out whether or not the person that you're dealing with is indeed a reliable witness or is indeed a toxic person in disguise. Excuse me. Alas, many people are simply too trusting, and they end up paying the price for neglecting the all-important aspect of testing, whereby trust is seen as something that is being earned rather than something that is being given away for free. Now, as I say, this is kind of information that I've garnered over the last 30 odd years, and I believe it to be quite sound both empirically as well as from a value basis. Moving on, when I talk about maturity, which you'll remember is in the first line of that last slide, along with truth, basically being truthful and a decent person. This, from my work on the maturity continuum, best read from the bottom up, where I denote those levels of selfish, self-centered, self-aware and selfless. I have a dual meaning running, and it pays to understand that and remember it if you can. There's the classic dictionary definition of the terms, as well as the inherent temperament meaning that I often refer to. I won't bore you with reading them all out now, because no doubt you can read it for yourself if you do, as I say, and just pause the video at appropriate points. Certainly save us both a lot of time if you do so. I'll just pick out the self-centered level as the example. Everything revolves around me and what I am doing at any given moment. Is more like the dictionary definition and more like my temperament definition. My way is the right way, and I am therefore more special than others who really don't measure up. And that core temperament value, as you can see here from the selfish level, my core value is the only core value that ever matters, and I am special and unique in having and pursuing it in such a superior way. Of course, you move up a hierarchy of maturity when you no longer are thinking or acting in that way, and you've come to understand that other people's core values are just as important, and sometimes in some scenarios even more important than your own. And that's the definition up here I have for selfless: able to stand apart from your own temperamental inclination and appraise its appropriateness for any given circumstance, conversation, situation, etc. It's a hallmark of the mature that they're able to do this. But having said that, I don't believe that I've ever encountered anybody who is truly even self-aware, let alone selfless in this inherent temperament meaning of the terms. You can find people who are, in the dictionary definition sense, at times. Some types, actually one type in particular, much more adept at selflessness than others. However, having said that, it's a matter of conjecture and your understanding at this point, I guess, because you don't know what the types are. I have you over a barrel in a sense there, because I do, obviously, because of the work that I've done. Not that I deliberately want to hold you over a barrel for anything, but until you understand it and you've experienced it, then you really don't get to understand it fully. So it's all conjecture until it's actually fact and experience. Now, a picture paints 1,000 words. You can see I have at the bottom there, even though there are only 447 words on this, I could actually talk to this for maybe an hour altogether, where I would go into a full description, which takes up a chapter of a book. But of course I won't be doing that for purposes of time. As you can see over here, I've judiciously placed another one of my quotable quotes. Maturity is the process of developing better and better thoughts about our own thought processes. And so what I'm talking about here very often in this maturity continuum sense is both meanings, whereas many could be forgiven for thinking only in terms of this, if they indeed even know these. Most people are too selfish and self-centered to even care. So let's move on to the next slide, where we'll get a bit more gist about the maturity, and often useful to show people extremes of something to give you a feel for the range of information within that concept. Here, of course, on the left we have the red, and on the right the blue. Path of least resistance. We are all born selfish. We have no choice in the matter. We can't speak. We can't do for ourselves. We have to scream to get what we want. Of course, when you're much older, let's imagine you're in your 30s or 40s, you're in a queue to the teller or even to the grocery shopping queue, and you behold the person who's carrying on like a 3-year-old having a fit because they don't have the patience or the tolerance to stand in line and wait their turn. Now, when you're a baby screaming to get what you want, that's normal. When you are a 30 to 40-year-old doing that, most people in our own minds observe this and recognise that the person should have progressed further than that 3-year-old tantrum chucking stage. But alas, many people don't, and indeed you can witness that on occasion in those kinds of queues, as I have. So, those poor old parents of that child are forever trying to get those children from this side of the ledger to this side of the ledger, and very often with great difficulty. So moving on. Now, why am I telling you this? Just before we move along, actually. One of the reasons I like to share this kind of information is I hope to save people from the kinds of stories that I've heard over the years when I've had clients crying out their woes and troubles to me of having had toxic relationship, been in a relationship with a toxic person. Now, you have to be able to understand that, let's just put it a different way here. Let's say that you could be forgiven for wondering, wouldn't it be great if the selfless person here could marry the selfish one, and then that would train the other one out of it. Sadly, that's not how it works. You can't want it for somebody else. You can't do it for somebody else, contrary to popular belief, it seems. You have to want it for yourself. And people do get married thinking that they're going to be changing their partner for the better. And sadly, that's just not going to happen. The person that you marry should be already of a reasonable level of maturity whereby a successful relationship with them is possible. So having said that, moving along, one of the reasons, of course, and one of the descriptions in that red left-hand side of the previous slide, and as I say here, no point arguing truth with those who believe in the power of their lies to distort truth. A little bit of added information here that I've placed, which will make a bit more sense now. Excuse me. In addition to basic questioning and investigative skills, you also need to develop these, your listening ears. Because everybody I've ever had a session with who were explaining the woes of their relationship, well, when I say everybody, almost without exception, they were telling me that they were getting clues early on, even sometimes before the relationship. One client I remember saying that friends of, it's a woman meeting a man, friends of his early on, when they just met, was saying, "What are you doing with him? You're too good for him." You need to understand that those clues are there if only you have ears to listen and hear. Sadly, most people, when I say most people, a lot of people don't. It's the old saying, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. And I've certainly heard that quite a few times in my time. So let's move along. Next slide. This is the kind of work that I do with couples. I have this up quite often when we're discussing the concept of compatibility. I won't go too much into it at the moment because the all-important aspect of time. You can pause it, of course, and have a better look at this, but just to announce the main concept here. Temperament, personality issues and / goals over here, common compatibility categories where you either are or are not compatible with your spouse. We have the notion here of conflicted relationships and vitalized relationships. Your temperament underpinning the character of who you are, very often being responsible for these differences. Of course, the temperament of the other person being the other side, the other half of the coin, where you will indeed have these clashes. And enlightenment and intelligence is a big part of it. If you do indeed decide that you want to do some of this kind of work, because obviously I only put videos up on YouTube to act as free marketing, albeit it's not actually, free is probably not the right term because I actually get paid for it, albeit not a lot. YouTube doesn't pay a great deal. But it's a credible way of actually making a little bit of money and being able to do some advertising and get people interested in the work. But you're certainly not going to get all of the information that I've accrued over these 30 odd years on YouTube because I have to feed myself, my wife, and other members of the family. Now, moving on to the next slide. This is what it looks like. Toxicity in relationships, it's ugly. Self-monitoring for your own selfish behaviours, childish, intolerant, demanding, sulky, payback, etc., is vital for the survival of your relationship. A relationship is a partnership that requires a team effort, so individualistic, self-centered behaviour must be limited to times that you are on your own, engaged in solo pursuits. And there's plenty of that in relationships. You can always schedule time for yourself. Many partners do in relationships. Obviously not too much, but enough in the sense to be able to maintain your own self-interest. Competition belongs outside the relationship in the competitive world. It is competitive enough in this world without having it going on inside your relationship as well. There's enough stress out there. You don't want it in your relationship. Friendly rivalry is a different subject, but outright competition where where each partner's competing with the other for the moral high ground, for example, doesn't bode well for a relationship. The world of your relationship must be a cooperative haven from these outside competitive forces, especially when there's kids involved and around. Now, again, I won't insult you by reading all of these out. I don't like to insult people's intelligence unless it's absolutely necessary to read something out, in which case I figure I make an exception to that rule. For now, however, it's enough for you to be able to see this information and decide for yourself whether or not any of it seems to be applicable to your relationship. We grow from being screaming, selfish babies through to children, adolescents, and on to adults. Sadly, with many people you wouldn't know, you'd hardly know that they'd grown up at all, because much of that childish behaviour is still present. And there's this concept, the child within. I believe that's true to a certain extent, and you do need to monitor yourself and bite your tongue and realise at times when it isn't about you, it's about your partner, and vice versa, of course. So that's the kind of work that I'm very often involved with, primarily helping people in the core way of showing them the temperament that they inherited from the great genetic lottery, the weaknesses inherent in that pattern, as well as the strengths, and how to use the strengths to mitigate, to reduce the extent and the damage of the weaknesses, and for both partners. And suddenly everything starts to make sense for people when they finally figure out what those patterns are and how perhaps they're clashing, or even how they augment each other in ways that perhaps the couple involved might not have realised. So it's definitely life-changing work, definitely worth finding out about. And of course you won't get it for free on YouTube. You would need to contact me and book your sessions. So having said all of that, I'll leave you with that thought and catch you on the next one, guys.